For 26 years, I believed I was the problem. The difficult one. The one who never quite fit inside my own family. My parents smiled wider when my sister walked into a room, handed her opportunities like gifts they'd been saving just for her, and looked at me like I was a mistake they'd learned to tolerate. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was being dramatic. Then my grandmother, 3 days before she died, pulled me close and whispered something that shattered everything I thought I knew, and rebuilt me from the ground up. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Marlo Delaney, and I grew up in a mid-sized town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew your last name and your business. My parents, Gerald and Connie Delaney, weren't monsters. That's what made it so hard to explain to anyone. They fed me, clothed me, kept the lights on. But from as far back as I could remember, there was my sister Brenly, 2 years older, and then there was me. And the distance between us and our parents' eyes was a canyon I could never cross. Brenly got the new clothes. I got the hand-me-downs. Brenly got the bedroom with the window seat. I got the one next to the furnace room. Brenly cried once at dinner, and my mother held her for 10 minutes. I broke my wrist falling off a bike, and my father told me to stop making a scene. I was 8 years old. The thing about growing up like that is you learn to shrink. You stop asking for things because asking only highlights how little you receive. You stop crying because nobody comes. You start watching instead, studying the gap between how they treat her and how they treat you, trying to find the reason, trying to find what you did wrong. Was I too loud? Too quiet? Too needy? Not pretty enough? Not easy enough to love? I tried everything a child tries. I brought home good grades. I stayed out of trouble. I kept my room clean without being asked. Nothing moved the needle. Brenly could fail a class, and my mother would call the teacher. I could ace every test and hear nothing but silence at the dinner table. What I didn't understand then, what I couldn't possibly have understood, was that the reason had nothing to do with anything I'd done. The reason existed before I even took my first breath. And I wouldn't learn it until the very end. The favoritism wasn't something that happened occasionally. It was the weather of our household, constant, invisible to outsiders, suffocating to me. Every school play, every report card, every birthday. Brenly's moments were celebrated loudly and mine were acknowledged the way you acknowledge a bill you don't want to pay. I remember my 14th birthday clearly. My mother baked Brenly's favorite cake, lemon, even though it was my birthday. When I pointed it out, she looked genuinely confused, like it hadn't even occurred to her that it mattered. Brenly just smiled and cut herself the first piece. I sat there with a forced smile on my face, eating cake that wasn't even chosen for me, at a party that felt like it belonged to someone else. At school plays, my parents sat in the front row when Brenly performed. The one year I got a speaking part, they arrived late and left early because Brenly had a stomach ache and needed to go home. I stood on that stage in my costume and scanned the audience and found their seats already empty. I was 11 years old. I finished my lines anyway. I don't know why I'm still proud of that, but I am. Teachers notice sometimes. My 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Paulson, once pulled me aside after parent-teacher night and asked if everything was okay at home. I told her yes because I didn't have the words for what it actually was. It didn't feel like abuse. It didn't leave marks. It was just a constant, quiet message that I mattered less. And after enough years, you stop questioning the message and start believing it. What kept me going through all of it was my grandmother, my father's mother, Lorette Delaney. She was a retired schoolteacher, sharp and direct, with silver hair she kept in a long braid. She lived on a farmhouse in rural Tennessee, and every summer I spent 2 weeks with her. Those 2 weeks were the only time I felt like a whole person. She never treated me like a burden or an afterthought. She looked me in the eye when she talked to me. She asked what I thought about things and then actually listened to the answer. She taught me to garden, to cook from scratch, to read before signing anything. She used to tell me the world would try to cheat me and that knowing what I was owed was my only real protection. I thought she was speaking generally. About life. About people. I had no idea she was speaking about my own family, and that she had already decided to do something about it. The clearest moment everything shifted came when I was 17. I had spent 3 years doing everything right. I maintained a near-perfect GPA while working weekend shifts at a local diner, saving every dollar I could, and filling out scholarship applications at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed. I wasn't doing it to impress anyone. I had already accepted that impressing my parents wasn't something I was capable of. I was doing it for myself, because somewhere inside me I still believed that if I worked hard enough, I could build a door out of that house and walk through it. When the acceptance letter from Whitmore University arrived, I held it in the parking lot of the diner before my shift and read it 3 times. It was a private school in Pennsylvania with a journalism program I had researched for 2 years. The partial scholarship they offered was significant. The remaining gap was around $14,000 a year. Real money, but not impossible money. I went home that evening with the letter in my hand and something close to hope in my chest. My father read it without expression. My mother smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Then they told me they couldn't make it work. Money was too tight. Community college in town was the practical choice. They said it gently, like they were doing me a favor by being realistic. I told myself it was fine. I went to my room and I told myself it was fine. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the hallway when I heard my father on the porch talking to our neighbor. He was talking about Whitmore University. He was talking about Brenly. He said they had found a way to make it happen for her, that it was her dream school, that they were so proud. I stood completely still in that hallway for a long time after he came back inside. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I just stood there while something quietly broke and then quietly hardened in its place. What I found out later was that Brenly hadn't even applied to Whitmore on her own. My parents had encouraged her to apply after I got in. They paid her full tuition gap without a single conversation about money being tight. I went to community college. I showed up, did the work, and kept my face neutral at every family dinner. But I was different after that. The part of me that had been waiting for them to show up, really show up, stopped waiting. I put that energy somewhere it would actually grow. Into myself. Into getting out. Into never needing them for anything again. I didn't walk out of community college defeated. I walked out with honors. Then I transferred to a state university, worked multiple jobs to cover tuition and rent, and finished my degree in communications. Nobody helped me. Nobody co-signed anything. Nobody showed up on move-in day with boxes and lunch money. Every step was mine, paid for with hours I worked and sleep I skipped. At 22, I packed what I owned into my car and drove to Columbus with $900 in savings and a contact list I had built entirely on my own. I got a job at a mid-sized PR firm, and I worked like I had something to prove, because I did. Within 4 years, I was managing client accounts worth more than my parents' house. I wasn't flashy about it. I didn't call home to share the news. I just kept going, kept building, kept adding another brick to something that was entirely mine. The walls I built around my family were just as deliberate as everything else. Holidays became short visits with polite conversation. Phone calls were surface level and brief. I was never rude. I never caused a scene. I just stopped being available in the way a daughter is supposed to be available, because that kind of openness had never been safe in that house. My parents didn't seem to notice the distance. They were occupied. Brenly had graduated from Whitmore, with a communications degree, the exact program I had applied for, married a man named Colt Abernethy, and settled 20 minutes from my parents' front door. She had 2 daughters. My parents were at every birthday party, every school event, every weekend dinner. They were the kind of grandparents people write about warmly. I was the daughter who lived far away and was always so busy. I let them believe that. It was easier than the truth, which was that I had simply stopped knocking on a door that was never going to open for me. The one relationship I protected was with Grandma Lorette. I drove down to Tennessee every few months and called her every Sunday without fail. She was in her early 80s by then, and her body was starting to slow down. A bad hip, some heart trouble, the kind of wear that accumulates quietly over a long life. But her mind was as sharp as it had ever been. What I noticed on those visits was the way she watched me. Not with sadness exactly. More like someone who was carrying something heavy and measuring whether the time had come to set it down. Every time I left, I had the feeling she had almost said something and then decided to wait a little longer. I didn't know what she was waiting for. I just knew she was. The winter I was 26, Lorette's health dropped sharply. Within the same week, my entire family suddenly remembered she existed. Gerald and Connie drove down from Ohio. Brenly and Colt loaded up the car and brought the girls. The farmhouse that had seen maybe 2 family visits in the last decade was now full of people who were deeply, urgently concerned about Grandma Lorette. I watched it happen from a distance before I even arrived, and I knew exactly what it was. It wasn't love. It was inventory. I took 2 weeks off work and drove down alone. When I walked through the front door, my mother was reorganizing Laurette's kitchen cabinets for what she called efficiency. My father was on the porch making phone calls. Brenly was sitting in the best armchair in the living room, the one closest to Laurette's bedroom, asking in a sweet voice whether Laurette had given any thought to what she wanted to leave to the family. Laurette was propped up in her bed with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It wasn't sadness. It was a specific kind of patience, the kind that has already decided it's done tolerating something. When I walked into her room and sat beside her, she reached out and took my hand. She held it without saying anything for a long time. Just held it. I didn't speak either. We had always been able to do that, sit together without filling the silence. That night, after the house had gone quiet and everyone else had settled into sleep, she asked me to close the bedroom door. I did. I pulled the chair close to her bed and sat down. She was propped against her pillows with her silver braid loose over one shoulder, and she looked at the door once to make sure it was shut before she looked back at me. She said she needed to tell me something she should have said years ago. She said she had been trying to protect me and that she now believed she had been wrong to wait. My heart was already moving fast before she got to the next part. She looked at me with the clearest, steadiest eyes, and she told me that Gerald Delaney was not my biological father. She told me my mother had an affair. She told me Gerald had found out when I was 3 months old, that he had chosen to stay in the marriage, but that he had never chosen me. Not truly. Not the way a father is supposed to choose his child. I sat very still, and every unexplained thing from my entire life rearranged itself into a shape that finally, terribly made sense. I didn't move from that chair for 3 hours. Laurette told me everything in the calm, careful way she did most things. No drama, no apology for the weight of it, just the facts laid out one after another like she had been organizing them for years. Which I realized she had. My mother Connie had a brief affair in the months before I was born with a man named Declan Hurst. He was a contractor who had done work on their house. Gerald suspected something was wrong and confirmed it through his own quiet investigation. He confronted Connie and she admitted it. He made the decision to stay. They had Brenly, a mortgage, a life that was already built. But the terms he set for himself were rigid and unspoken. He would raise me. He would keep the household intact. But he would not love me the way he loved Brenly. He would do what was required and nothing beyond that. Laurette had known. She had begged him, more than once, to make a different choice. He refused every time. So she had spent years watching it happen, caught between loyalty to her son and a fury she couldn't fully act on. The summers she gave me, the phone calls, the way she looked at me like I mattered, all of it had been deliberate. She had been trying to fill something she knew Gerald was leaving empty on purpose. She had kept the secret because she was afraid of what it would do to me as a child. Now she believed the waiting had been its own kind of wrong. She told me I was always the strongest one, that I had built everything myself and hadn't needed them, but that I had deserved to know why it had always been that way. Then she squeezed my hand and told me she needed to show me something else. She reached under her pillow and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a letter from her attorney confirming that she had updated her will. The farmhouse, 22 acres in Tennessee, appraised at over $600,000, was being left entirely to me. Her savings, a separate $180,000, were split between me and a local library she had loved for decades. Gerald received nothing. Brenly received nothing. She looked at me and said the land was supposed to go to her son. But he had forfeited his right to it the day he decided to punish a baby for something that baby had no part in. I held the envelope in both hands and didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing that felt adequate enough to say. Laurette passed away 4 days later. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet and gray outside, and I was holding her hand when she went. She didn't struggle. She just slowly wasn't there anymore. I sat with her for a while after, in that bedroom where she had told me the truth, and I said goodbye the best way I knew how. The funeral was small because that was what she had wanted. A few neighbors, a woman from her church, her attorney. My parents and Brenly were there. We stood on opposite sides of the grave, and nobody said much to anyone. I drove back to Columbus 2 days later, and went through the motions of returning to normal life, while carrying something that felt too large to fit inside an ordinary week. 3 weeks after she was buried, her attorney contacted the family with the terms of the will. The phone call from Gerald came the same evening. I almost didn't answer. When I did, I heard a version of my father I had never encountered before, loud, unraveling, furious. This was not the man who had spoken to me in flat, clipped sentences my entire life. This was someone who felt something, finally, and what he felt was entitled and robbed. He called me manipulative. He said I had turned his mother against her own family. He said I had taken advantage of a sick old woman in her final days to get my hands on what wasn't mine. I held the phone and let him finish. My mother was crying in the background. Brenly sent me a text message so ugly I read it once, deleted it, and blocked her number without responding. Colt, my brother-in-law who I had met exactly 11 times in my life, sent me a formal email using the word litigation. They contested the will. Their attorney filed a legal challenge on the grounds that Lorette had been of diminished mental capacity when she made her decisions. I found an attorney in Nashville named Vashti Okafor and hired her within the week. She was sharp, calm, and thorough. Exactly the kind of person you want standing next to you when your family decides to go to war. I was grieving. I was frightened in the way anyone is frightened when something they've been given is suddenly being fought over in a legal process they don't control. But underneath both of those feelings was something I hadn't expected to find. A stillness. A kind of bedrock calm that held me steady even when everything else felt like it was shaking. I knew the truth now. About myself, about my family, about all of it. And that knowledge was something no attorney could file a challenge against. The legal fight was not quick, and it was not clean. My father's attorney came in aggressive. They deposed nurses who had cared for Lorette in her final months. They talked to neighbors, to people from her church, to anyone who had spent time near her toward the end. The strategy was clear. They wanted to paint a picture of a woman who hadn't been in full control of her mind when she made her decisions. What they found instead dismantled their own case. Lorette had updated her will 6 months before she died, not in her final days. She had done it in her attorney's office, in good health, with 2 witnesses present and a notarized statement of intent attached to the document. Every person who had been near her in those final months described a woman who was sharp, direct, and fully aware of what she was doing and why. The nurses remembered her correcting medical staff on medication timing. Her neighbor recalled a conversation about local property taxes 2 weeks before her health dropped. There was nothing fragile or confused about the picture that emerged. Lorette had seen this challenge coming from a mile away and had built a wall around her decisions that couldn't be climbed. Vashti told me quietly one afternoon that my grandmother had planned the whole thing like a general mapping out a campaign. She said it with something close to admiration. What came out of the legal process that never made it into a courtroom was something that hit me harder than any of the rest of it. While reviewing documents, Vashti came across correspondence between Lorette and Gerald going back 15 years. Letters. Real ones, written by hand and kept. In them, Lorette pleaded with her son repeatedly to treat me fairly. She told him what he was doing was wrong. She told him a child deserved better than to be punished for the choices of adults. Gerald's responses, where they existed, told her to stay out of his marriage. One letter, written when I was 16, stopped me completely. In it, Lorette told Gerald plainly that if he could not find it in himself to be a real father to me, she would find another way to make sure I was taken care of. He had read that letter. He had known exactly what she was capable of doing. He had chosen to ignore it and assume it would never happen. I sat in Vashti's conference room and cried when I read them. Not because I was sad, exactly, but because those letters meant someone had been fighting for me the entire time, quietly, in rooms I never knew about. The will contest was dismissed. The farmhouse was mine. After the legal outcome, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't write a letter. I had nothing to say that hadn't already been said inside a courtroom, and I had learned a long time ago that saying things to my family didn't change anything anyway. They reached out first. My mother wrote me a letter. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope and sat with it unopened for 2 days before I finally read it. It was a careful letter, measured in the way people are measured when they want something. She acknowledged that things had not been equal between Brenly and me growing up. She said Gerald had struggled with a difficult situation. She used soft words for hard things, the way people do when they want to apologize just enough to open a door without actually taking responsibility for what's on the other side of it. She talked about moving forward as a family. She talked about conversation and healing. And then near the end, in the same careful tone, she mentioned that they were facing some financial pressure. She said a loan might be something I would consider. I read it twice. Then I got out a piece of paper and wrote back. I kept it short because she didn't deserve a long letter, and because I didn't want to give her more words to pick apart and reframe. I told her I appreciated that she had written. I told her that a single letter did not undo 26 years of deliberate and consistent neglect. I told her I was not able to offer financial support. I told her I wished them well, and that any possibility of rebuilding something between us would require significant time and real demonstrated change, not words on paper asking for money. I sent it certified mail, so there was no question it arrived. I never heard back. Brenly and I have not spoken since the week Laurette was buried. I don't know if that will ever change. There is a particular kind of grief in that, quieter than I expected. She is still my sister in the truest sense, the person I shared a childhood with, the one who knows what our kitchen smelled like and what our parents looked like when they were younger. That counts for something even when everything else has gone wrong. But I have also come to understand that some relationships don't break. They simply reveal that they were never fully formed. Brenly and I were never close. We were assigned to each other by birth and kept apart by everything that came after. Acknowledging that isn't bitterness. It's just the truth, and I have learned to make my peace with truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I still live in Columbus during the week. But on long weekends I drive down to Tennessee, and I walk through the farmhouse, and I breathe differently there than I do anywhere else. I have been restoring it slowly. The porch needed new boards. The garden Laurette kept had gone wild without her hands in it, and I have been learning, season by season, how to bring it back. The kitchen still smells the way it always did, and I have stood in it many times trying to remember exactly how she moved when she cooked, the particular way she held a wooden spoon. I'm not sure I'll ever fully get it right, but I keep trying. There is a property manager locally who looks after things during the weeks I'm away. There is also a part of me that already knows I will move there permanently someday. The city gave me the career and the independence I needed. The farmhouse feels like the life I actually want. I started therapy shortly after Laurette died. I needed help carrying the specific weight of what I had lost. Not just her, but the version of my childhood that I had to finally stop hoping would somehow get better. My therapist is a calm and precise woman named Dr. Hendricks, and she has helped me understand things I had been circling around for years without landing on. She told me once that I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn love that had already been decided against me before I was old enough to understand what love even was. She said the remarkable thing wasn't that it left marks. It was that I had built something genuine anyway. I think about Laurette every single day. I think about that bedroom and her voice, and the way she held my hand like she was transferring something important through the grip. She could not go back and fix what happened to me. Nobody can do that. But she made sure I knew the truth, and she made sure I had ground under my feet that nobody could take away, and she made sure I understood that someone in that family had seen exactly who I was and chosen me deliberately. I don't lie awake waiting for my parents to confess or for Brenly to call with an apology. That chapter is closed, and I am the one who closed it. What I wanted, underneath everything, was simply to be okay without them. To not need their version of me to be whole. I am there now. It took longer than it should have and cost more than it should have, but I am there. If you grew up feeling like the one who didn't quite fit, I want you to hear this clearly. That was never about you. Sometimes the people meant to choose you don't. And sometimes someone else does. Laurette chose me. That was enough. That was everything.